Welcome to The Monsters Within. My name is Janee Jackson-Doering, and I'm a library consultant in Des Moines, Iowa. The horror novels in today's panel explore terror in many forms, from supernatural threats to the darkest corners of the human soul. And with that, I am pleased to welcome the authors for today's panel. Libby Edwardson, We Sent Them Down Singing. Set in the coal mining Appalachian town of Jubilee, West Virginia, 15-year-old Finney Skinny Caldwell seeks the truth about her mother's disappearance and uncovers a sinister, supernatural evil tied to the man who took her. Josh Malerman, Pictures of You. This story involves a woman named Emily who wakes up in a strange hotel room only to discover she's inside a picture frame, a living subject for a sinister artist who sees her as her ultimate creation. Cynthia Pelayo, Something Followed Us Home. This is an anthology of Latina stories that explores themes of immigration, faith, colonization, and folklore through a horror lens. Markus Redmond for Blood Rising. This historical alternate history sequel in the Blood Saga series follows vampire Quadzo or Okoro, leader of the Ramaga tribe. Quadzo and the vampires wage war against slave owners, face new threats from daylight walking vampires, and he faces betrayal while seeking liberation. And Johanna van Veen for Bone of My Bone. This book is set during the 30 Years' War in 1635. This historical folk horror novel follows a nun, Sister Ursula, and Elsbeth, a strong-willed peasant woman. Both women find a saint's gilded skull and embark on a quest to reunite it with its body, hoping for a wish. But they're also being pursued by a dark necromancer. Welcome, authors. So my first question is for Johanna. Johanna, your novel combines elements of religious horror and folk horror to examine Sister Ursula, who struggles to maintain her faith, and Elsbeth, a peasant girl who has lost her faith during the 30 years war in Europe. I'm curious, what was it about that time period and these genres that made you write this book?
So I actually have two master's degrees in early modern history and literature. So it's actually a surprise to me that it took me this long to actually write about that time period. Um, but yeah, the 30 Years' War, as soon as you know a bit about early modern times, that is a very, very big conflict during that time. Very, very gruesome as well. So I think it was a very natural setting for a horror novel. And as for folk horror and religious horror, I think if you want to do the early modern time period justice, you have to engage with religion. The 30 Years' War is a religious war. It's not the only reason for that war, but it's definitely a very, very big part of it. And at the same time, I think if you actually look at what people believe, they also believe a lot of things we would now think are silly superstitions or perhaps no, yeah, they're no longer tied to Christianity, I would say. So I think in that sense, marrying like the religious horror with the folk horror is very natural for this time period.
Awesome. Thank you. Cynthia, I love how the stories in Something Followed Us Home, they're not your typical ghost stories. And I love the variety of tales that are in this anthology. Can you talk about what was the process of selecting these stories for this collection?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I wanted the voices to be as representative of the range of Latin horror, especially not just focused on one country, one experience, one tradition. And so the anthology features a range of authors from Argentina, Mexico, Ecuador, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and more. And so I wanted to know what haunted them. Like, what were the stories that you were told, that you experienced, that you perhaps even came across in newspaper clippings or in your studies, that just kind of continue to come back up every time you think about where you're from, your identity, and your culture. And I was so beyond impressed to be able to work with Mariana Enriquez and Agustina Bastarrica and to see the intensity that they all approach this with.
Thank you. Next question is from Marcus. In Blood Rising, I loved seeing Quadzo emerge as a leader of the Ramaga tribe. What shocked me was Rafazi's response to his leadership. And I'm trying not to spoil things for people who haven't read the first book leading up to now, but um, how did you approach the tension between both men for the sequel?
Uh, yeah, it's kind of interesting. So because it's a series, it was always planned. Like that conflict was always going to come. So what I wanted to do in Blood Slaves was plant the seeds of it. And so if you are paying attention to Rafazi, he
Mhm.
is telling you he is a coward. He is telling you that he abandoned his people. He is telling you that he was only in things for his own self-interest. Yeah, Quadzo's the first person he ever turned into a Ramungan, into a vampire, because he didn't want the responsibility. So we find all of that out for him in the first book. And so even though that first book is sort of a redemption for him, it also lays the groundwork for what he does in Blood Rising.
Awesome. Thank you. And yes, I do remember just seeing him. I remember him saying, I don't really want this. I don't really want this responsibility. So
He
yes,
didn't want to be a leader. He's like, you lead. I'm like, you do it. I'm not doing it. So it's, I mean, it's surprising, but not that surprising.
thank you. This question is for Libby. Libby, in We Sent Them Down Singing, you have two antagonists. Your antagonists, Zell Dorsey and Andy Defoe, they face the consequences of their evil decisions. How did you craft these memorable characters?
Yeah, so I really love this question. So with Zell, when I started writing, we sent them down singing. I started from a place of wanting to wanting to really embody the greed that has characterized modern Appalachia. So like we're really happy as a country to take from Appalachia. We will take its coal, we will take its timber, we will take its soldiers, but we don't ever give back. And so I wanted a monster that was that was big enough to embody that greed, which is why I think I landed on cosmic horror because that was the only lens that I could imagine like that level of greed. And I think also the consumption of Appalachia and the consumption of its people and its resources, it's really kind of casual. And I think like in cosmic horror, you have, these huge primordial, beings that we are inconsequential to them. And I think that Appalachia has been treated that way by regular human beings. And so I wanted, because even now, with these huge AI data centers, Appalachia is being relentlessly targeted in West Virginia, where my book is set. They passed laws recently that limit people's ability to even push back against these AI data centers. Like they're removing any tools they have to fight. And so that has been historically the story of Appalachia. And so for me, Zell Dorsey just represents the greed that we have used when we want what Appalachia has. And then I think for Andy Defoe, he's the opposite of that. So he is utterly human and he is like he does evil things and he commits unimaginable acts and he becomes monstrous to do that, but he's doing them in the name of love. So he is willing to become a monster to protect the one person in his life that he feels is worth saving, which is his granddaughter, Maud. And so I think that even though he is super morally gray, he's probably the character that I identify the most easily with because what wouldn't I do to protect the people that I love? Like, I probably don't want to know the answer to that question because my story might look a lot more like Andy Defoe's than I'd care to admit.
Awesome. Thank you. Josh, in your book, Pictures of You, Helen, the antagonist, I'm trying not to spoil things as much, is a maddened woman and artist who puts Emily in some very unusual poses. What or who was the inspiration for Helen?
I mean, this is one of the first questions, I've ever been asked about pictures of you. So there's a side of me that's like, I don't know, man. I don't even know for sure, but I do, right? I do. It's like I'm real big on like encouragement versus discouragement. And rather than like a single person, I think Helen represents discouragement. And
Mm.
while I like while there's a side of me that thinks that her medium, what she's doing is genius. There's a side of me that really halfway through writing this, I'm like, wait a minute, am I actually siding with this lady right now? But it was like, I don't care if this is a spoiler. She's coming from a bad place, whether or not what she's doing is visionary or not. And I just think like back to like, my gosh, I was like 19 in a car with my friends and I sang along to like a Doors song for a second, and a girl said, "Oh, you have a cool voice." And like I've been in a band for 30 years now. Was it because of that? I remember getting a book for like my birthday. I was a kid, and it's the first book I ever like stood up and just read the whole thing on my own. Mom and dad didn't read it to me, and they started clapping. And now I'm working on book 44. Like that's a direct line to me. These are direct lines, like the tiniest bit of encouragement. And so Helen here. I don't know that I think we've all probably had some doofus in our lives that like discouraged us, but I'm not quite like Helen has done here. So I'm not modeling her after someone, but more after the idea, like the concept of discouragement.
Wow, awesome. Thank you. This question is now for Cynthia. Um, some of my favorite stories from the anthology are the following. We Are Gathered Here Together. That one was so cool. Her first cruise ship in El Hibaro de Puerto Rico. Which story or stories are your favorites from this collection?
Oh gosh, I have so many. But so Mariana Enriquez does what she always does. Like she makes the political personal and then the personal terrifying. And then Agustina Bastarrica, she wrote Tender is the flesh, Tender is the flesh. And she has this way of bringing like this unflinching gaze into something. And she did it with like this shorter form. Uh, but another story I really enjoyed was Luz y Fer by Leopoldo Gal. It's such a cool take on like the metaphysical detective story. And so I was like really impressed that someone took my request and they developed like this really cool and original detective story.
Oh, thank you. Marcus, your book Blood Rising mixes alternate history with supernatural horror. This is a two-part question. What challenges did you encounter as you wrote this book using these elements? And what was your favorite scene to write?
Hmm. Favorite scene. Okay. So, with any sort of historical thing, the challenge is getting the history right. You know, um, I would say it was more challenging for the first book because the first book is so steeped in history. In this
Mhm.
one, I'm getting to shift because the core of this is the alternate history. So I'm starting to be able to play around with history a little bit, but still, it's important that the history that we know, the real stuff that happened in the real world, resonates and is accurate. Um, and so sometimes, I want to go do my alternate history, but I have to reel it back in and do the thing that's actually what happened. So that's always sort of like the juggling of the series. Um, I think as it continues, that will become less and less because I'll just get to change things. But as far as ooh, probably the chapter, uh, since we've already talked a little bit about Rafazi, so folks kind of know something's going on with him. the chapter called "The Mad and the Bad," where
Okay.
two of them face off. I think that was the most fun. That was the most fun chapter to write.
Well, thank you. This question is for Josh and then Libby. Um, I loved how both of your books took ordinary places in small towns and through world building turned them into places of dread. You have the hotel room in Pictures of You, and the caves and mountains, and We Sent Them Down Singing, respectively. I'm curious, how did you build scenes of dread and tension in these books? We'll start with Josh, then Libby.
I think the movie Paranormal Activity like changed my life in this way because I had already been a huge horror nut, up till then. And then I'm watching this movie and I'm totally freaked out. None of my friends were, and I'm like hiding behind them. And I'm like, wait a minute, this movie it takes place in a condo. Like this isn't a old Victorian home. This isn't, and I'm all for, I've written my own big scary house stuff but there was something about that. Like, if horror is the unknown, well, maybe the setting can play a major role in that too, right? Because we, as horror readers and lovers, aren't used to certain settings. A lakeside Michigan town that has, like a Walgreens on the corner and this and that. It's not very like scary from the outset. It's not like we're entering old Ravenwood, with with like creepy gates and stuff. No, no, no. This is a little tourist town. And Paranormal Activity, I always think about that. I'm like, it it didn't just scare you with a condo. I think the condo helped scare you because it was unknown to you as a horror fan. And so I think the setting can do more work for us in that way than we even realize. And that's yeah.
Thank you, Libby.
Yeah, when I write, I pretty much always begin with place. I've lived a lot of places, and I think part of my writing is kind of like each place comes with its own unique traumas, and I think part of my writing is kind of like, like reckoning with the things, and finding reasons to remember why those places are also good while recognizing, that, there's a dark side to every place. And so I always want readers to feel like they are like on that street, like walking just a few steps behind the character. Like they can't quite see what's happening up ahead, but there's breadcrumbs like along the way so that, they can pick these little bits up and just odd things that stand out that maybe don't make a lot of sense until you're holding them all in your hand and you can be like, oh, okay, that's what these things mean. So I try to do a lot of that to keep, readers kind of picking up like the threads as they go. And then I try to keep my chapters like fairly short so that, people can be, and I also try to end each chapter with something like a little bit alarming or a little bit strange. So people will think, well, I could read just one more chapter because these are short. And so I think like that's kind of what I do to kind of build like the momentum and bring the reader into it. But I think all of that world building is really meaningless if they don't care about the characters. So I think the biggest part of building dread is creating characters that the reader actually cares about, because that's going to do so much of the heavy lifting for you. Because when you put your characters in any kind of peril or any kind of danger, that's going to be heightened for the reader because they're rooting for them because they don't want something bad to happen to a character that they love. So I focus a lot on building like the relationship between like the reader and the character.
Awesome. Thank you both. This question is for Libby, then Johanna. Both of your characters in your books face resilience in the face of horror. Skinny, I loved Skinny from We Sent Them Down Singing, and Elsbeth and Sister Ursula in Bone of My Bone, respectively. What do you hope these characters can teach readers? We'll start with Libby, then Johanna.
Yeah, so I think that the media often portrays children as kind of wiser than their years. So they have this kind of preternatural knowledge that and understanding of the world that is not, that kind of defies their lived experience. And I wanted to push back against that a little bit because I think that's a lot of weight for kids to carry. I have a lot of kids. I've worked with kids. I was a librarian for 15 years, and so I wanted to I wanted Skinny to be exactly her age. Like I didn't want her to be, to have this kind of wisdom, and I wanted her to like feel braver when she had the people she loved by her side and to feel scared when she lost them. And I think she's kind of the antithesis of the chosen one, which we see a lot, I think, especially like in YA horror or YA just books in general. Um, but she finds strength to draw on even if she isn't the chosen one. And I wanted that strength to come more from like the grit of being raised by like this, tough as nails grandma, like in a town that, is carved out of the side of a mountain in a community of people that are often overlooked. And so I wanted her like reserves of strength to come from like culture and community rather than from some kind of predestined, fate for herself. And I think that my hope is that readers will see themselves reflected in Skinny, because I think that, heroes so rarely look the way they do, like, on our screens. And I think that usually what a hero looks like is, the lady in the applique sweatshirt who shows up with a casserole every time there's a tragedy, or the school teacher who stays in their hometown and 30 years later is still making an impact on children's lives. I think those are what heroes look like. And so I wanted the heroism that Skinny found to look more like that.
Awesome. Thank you. Johanna.
I think for both my characters, like Sister Ursula and Elsbeth, they both embody different forms of resilience. I would say the conflict is genuinely so terrible, so it's either keep going or die. There is no alternative. You can't opt out of it. It the I think in that sense because like the story is that they find the skull, right? And the skull they're basically promised if you reunite the skull with the saint's body, you will be granted a wish. And both of them have very, very important things to wish for. So that at least I would say is a very good motivator because they know if we give up, if we succumb to any of these horrors and this skull is not being reunited, we won't get what we want. And of course, what they want is, this pretty early on in the book, like both of them have lost people they very like dearly care about, and they want to use their wish for this. But what I do think is what it shows is kind of what Libby also said, like real resilience very rarely looks like what we might think it looks like. It's very often imperfect. Neither of these characters are perfect. I don't think they always make the right choices or the healthy choices, but they keep going. And I think that's ultimately what you can take away from it, that you don't have to be perfect. You don't always have to respond perfectly. And the main thing is to just keep going, to keep swimming.
Keep swimming. Yes. Thank you. And this question is for you, Johanna. Your descriptions of the necromancer, the Nashzir, hope I'm saying that right, and the Offhacker were creepy. They were just downright menacing. How much of these characters are folklore and fiction?
Oh, so the majority is actually like based on folklore. The necromancer is a bit more fictitious, I would say. I made him a man because when people think of witch hunts, very often they think it's medieval. That's not true. The majority of the witch hunts took place in early modern times, but there were a few of them in medieval times. And the interesting thing is that then it was mainly men who were convicted of witchcraft. And for example, in Scandinavian countries, I believe that if you look at the ultimate numbers, it's more men than women who were convicted. So we often think of it in terms of misogyny, which is very, very accurate, but it's not true that it's only women who are targeted. So that's something I want to represent with this necromancer, like an older type of witch, if you will. And as for the Nachtseher and the Aalfhokker, those are pretty accurate to actual Germanic folklore. I will say the term Nachtseher, which is from like the German to pull after, so basically you're pulling someone after you into death. That term is anachronistic. It's not something that people would have used in early modern times, but the concept was there. And the interesting thing about that is that it's sort of a um, vampire entity, but your regular Nachtseher is super boring because all they do is like lie in a grave and sort of suck the life force out of people from a distance. So they don't have to go out, they don't drink blood, they just sort of suck the life force out of people just by lying there. But there's one particular region where they have this very, very weird myth of the Nachtseher, which is included in the book, where they say that a Nachtseher first will eat their own hands and feet because they're so hungry. Then they crawl out of the grave and they're gonna like try and eat their family. And then in the end, they're gonna like, I don't know, climb a tower, try and get more people, which is very interesting when you think about it, because how are you gonna do that without your hands and feet? But like that's a very interesting question, I think. But yeah, so I wanted something a bit more active than just a corpse who's buried who like sucks people dry from afar. And as for the Aufhooker, that too is at least accurate to many of the folkloric tales we have, where they say that if you walk home late at night in the dark, it's possible for like a dead person to jump on your back and to basically say like, "Hey, I want to ride, like take me to my grave." And then yeah, it's like, well, why were you out in the first place? They don't mention like they don't explain why that is the case. Um, but every step you take, like this Aufhooker will get heavier and heavier and heavier and ultimately probably crush you to death. So I felt that was like, I mean, there's so many weird corpse-like revenant horrors that were just like there for the taking. So I didn't even have to change much.
Johanna, I just want to say real fast, I love the idea of this lazy vampire.
Right?
Like,
Just lying there like,
I feel like I relate to this dude. Like he just lays there and he's just like, I'm not gonna even drink any, I'm just gonna bring it to me. No, yeah.
yeah, I
I'm
can
gonna
just lie here.
I'm gonna like that's cool. I'm gonna look in more into that stuff. Thanks for telling us about that.
Elbeth's like, oh, my knee, my hip. Ah. Thank you, Johanna. This question is for Markus, Johanna, Libby, then Josh. What do you hope readers will take away from reading your novels?
Uh, I think for Blood Rising, I think it's the hope that things can change. I think for Blood Slaves, it was very much about personal power, like inner strength.
Mhm.
But I think the idea that these particular vampires are former enslaved people who are now taking control, they're leading, and they're changing what we know of history, I think is a solid message, especially for the times that we're living in right now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Johanna.
I would say kind of similarly that yeah, hope is always there if you're willing to look for it. There's always a reason to keep going.
Thank you, Libby.
I think my biggest hope for We Sent Them Down Singing is that that readers will come away with a different view of Appalachia. So I think the stereotypes that the media perpetuates about Appalachia are really lazy and boring. And I think the tropes that horror specifically has relied on are actively harmful because hillbilly horror loves like a violent, inbred, like toothless cannibal just lying in wait if you like turn up the wrong holler or you get a flat tire on some back, country road. And I think that what that trope actually does is perpetuates the idea that poor people are scary, that poor people are monstrous. And so I think that I think that poverty is monstrous. I think that poverty breeds desperation, and I think that desperate people sometimes do monstrous things. But what I wanted to do in the book was put the blame where I think it lies, which is on the systems that create poverty rather than the people who are the victims of those systems. And so I think that Appalachia gets painted with a really broad brush, and it's really unfair. I think like one of my favorite stories is the Battle of Blair Mountain, which is where they put a bunch of like men up on a mountain and they were coal miners and the working conditions were terrible, and they thought that at the time the societal divides were enough to keep the men separated. There were people from different races, different countries, different religious backgrounds, but what happened is they all got together and they said, wow, these working conditions are really terrible. Maybe we should organize and demand better working conditions. And it escalated to the point that the National Guard was called in and they were going to bomb the men out of the mountains. But what they did is they fought like the law, like, kind of guerrilla warfare style, and they tied bits of red cloth around their necks so that they wouldn't shoot each other. And so that's actually where the term redneck comes from. It's based in like labor rights and fighting for better working conditions. And in that town, every year they still hold a march for labor rights where everyone wears red handkerchiefs. And so I think that I think that Appalachia deserves a second look, and I hope that for some people, this book will be that.
Thank you. And Josh,
I think that I hope the same thing from Pictures of You as I hope from like the whole body of work, which is like I've always seen horror as sort of a way to Trojan horse childhood into adulthood because who's expected to believe in these things but kids, right? But somehow I've maintained that belief, at least for the duration of the book I'm reading, the movie I'm watching, the book I'm writing, the album I listen, whatever it might be. I'm able to believe in more. I'm able to believe to me in a strange way, someone seeing a ghost is the most optimistic thing I can imagine. That means that suggests there's more. And what's more optimistic than more, right? And so I I would hope that if somebody read a few of my books, and including Pictures of You, they walk away with this sense of like imagination. They walk away with a sense of fresh scenario. They walk away with a sense of not childhood as being naive although I do really like what you said, Libby, about children being represented, and I really like what you said about that. Um, but more like the amazing qualities of childhood. I would hope that the books I write and the horror stories I love reading too, like spark that in readers.
thank you. Cynthia, why do you think short stories are so accessible for readers, and what do you hope that they'll take away from this anthology?
I think short stories are one of the most democratic form of storytelling that we can experience. You can pick up a short story and read it during lunch, and by the time you return to your desk, your entire worldview has changed, and just like that. So I think read more short stories. Like you can read a short story in the morning, on the train, standing in line. I always have like a book with me wherever I'm at, and just taking, I think there's a lot of competition. I think with the you see at end of year people are like, I read 150 books and 300 books. It's like that's great, and I love those readers, and I appreciate that. I want the person that hasn't read a book and since high school. Like I want to get these people reading. Those are the people that I really care about because I want to show you that there's a world out there, and you can definitely access it with short stories. What I hope that people get out of the collection is that I think I want them to know that Latin horror isn't a subgenre. It's a tradition. It has roots that go back centuries through folklore, magical realism, Gothic. And so these writers in the anthology, they're not borrowing from the horror tradition. Like they are the tradition in Latin storytelling.
Thank you. So this question is for everyone. I have to remember, excuse me, all of your books and stories show that humans can be just as vile as a monster. Why do you think readers are drawn to horror stories? We'll start with Cynthia, then Libby, Josh, Johanna, then Marcus.
Oh. Because I think many of us know that the real monster is something that we can name. It's probably not the unknown thing that's creeping in the shadows. It could be the thing that's sitting across from you at dinner. Hark, it could also be the thing that put the scary thing in the basement. And so I think readers are drawn to those stories because they're looking for maybe a way to process the world that we live in, or to even have some type of language or explanation for humans' capacity to exhibit cruelty and perform cruelty.
Thank you, Libby.
Yeah, so I think that good horror is rarely about what is on the page or on the screen. I think that if you take something like Stephen King's It, that's not really about a scary clown. That's about returning to a town where terrible things happened to you as a child and confronting that trauma. So Pennywise is just kind of a placeholder for that childhood trauma. And I think that everybody brings something different, from their own experience. Maybe people are not in a place where they're safe enough to face down their own demons, but maybe it's helpful for them to read a story about characters who are forced to do just that. And so I think that horror is, I would argue in many ways the most realistic genre because I think we all, this world creates trauma. And I think that, that horror allows people to explore that in a way that is a little bit kind of coming in the back door. It's maybe it's too much to look at what's happened in your life, but maybe you can process some of those things through the traumas that the characters are dealing with.
Thank you, Josh.
Well, I definitely understand horror as like a reflection of the horrors of modern times and all that. But again, I come back to imagination. I guess I, s- I've always seen the draw of the horror story as being like, oh, look what we can come up with. Look what we can imagine. Look what we can do. Look at what Wes Craven came up with Freddy Krueger. What if you actually isolate that? Just that idea, the concept itself, it's so brilliant that in your dreams that you're afraid to go to sleep because this thing could hurt you. It's just so brilliant that is inspirational to me. Like, what else can I come up with? Like, does that mean I could also, this is going to sound silly, but can I also come up with a great present for Allison's birthday? Can I also come up with the right thing to say to my mom? Can I also come up? I feel like when I see the imagination like in full mode, it's inspiring to me beyond just writing books. It's like, oh, I can live thinking wider than I thought I could.
Thank you. Johanna.
I'm so sorry, my Wi-Fi cut out right when you asked the question. So could you repeat the questions for me, please?
Yeah. So why do you think readers are drawn to horror stories?
I think in general, I think most people have already mentioned this at this point, but because we are all scared at some point in our lives, usually as children. I know I was a very, very scared child. So one way to deal with that is to encounter it in a safe space because it's a little easier to read about scary stuff than to actually experience it. So I would say like that is part of it. I think maybe because some of us are thrill seekers a little bit as well. We want to enjoy these very horrible things from a very safe distance. And I say maybe enjoy is not the right word, but experience is probably more accurate. And I have to agree with what Josh said as well, where it's just great to marvel at all these imaginative ideas. And I think another reason is like apart from experiencing it from a safe place, what horror also does is show us that we can overcome these scary things. And that I think more than anything is very important that it shows us like, okay, no matter how horrible or scary things get, ultimately there is a way through that, a way to overcome that.
Thank you. And Marcus.
I mean, everyone's already made such great points. I think just to reiterate what Cynthia said, I think it's a way to process things. I mean, humans are the real monsters. All right.
Yeah.
Like we all know this. There, we don't necessarily have verifiable documentation that vampires and Frankenstein monsters and ghosts and then we don't know that any of these things actually exist. What we do know is that humans exist and humans do horrendous things. And I think what brings people to monster stories is it gives them a way to deal with these humans, these awful humans who've done these awful things, and it presents them with heroes that conquer them, much like Johanna said. I mean, horror to me, it's like punk music, it's like heavy metal, it's like rebel rock. It gives you a space to rail against the thing you feel powerless to rail against. And I think that's what horror does for a lot of people.
Thank you. Marcus, this I'm gonna start with you, then Cynthia, Josh, Johanna, then Libby. What scares you?
Death. The death in doctors. That's what scares me.
Yeah.
Everything else I can handle, I think, but yeah, death in doctors.
Thank you, Cynthia.
I have like the serious author, answer, that'll be something like, silence, when people go silent because they don't want to say something, they want to keep a secret, and they're choosing not to say something. So that's the serious author answer. My answer, aliens. I'm scared. I've never been scared of like a movie or a book, except for, do you remember the movie Signs?
Yeah.
And when like the alien like walked across the door, I was crying. I was screaming, I was crying. So like the idea of seeing an alien terrifies me.
You, Josh.
I had to stop reading Communion. I had to stop. Like, I'm a horror now. Like, that's all we read. I had to stop. I was like, Allison, this is making me feel weird, man. And I like Allison's my wife, by the way. I bring her up often. I think that God, my answer sounds way too serious. Well, I guess you said death, Marcus. But I guess momentarily losing control scares the hell out of me. Like the idea of like just momentarily, I'm not myself, and something happens, and then it's okay if I never came back because then whatever. But then to return and to be, like stuck with whatever occurred in that momentary lapse of reason, that I think that's like the scariest thing I can imagine.
You, Johanna.
Yeah, the serious and depressing answer would be the rise of fascism. But like on a like more personal note, I find like ghosts and corpses very scary. And it's funny that Josh mentioned Paranormal Activity because my mom didn't know what found footage horror was. She came across it like on like some channel late at night, and she thought it was real, and she was so terrified that she actually came to me and my sisters and she asked if she could sleep in our room. So like, and I understand that because I feel like I would have had the same reaction if I hadn't known it was like like a movie and not an actual documentary. But yeah, I'm afraid of ghosts and corpses.
You and Libby.
Yeah, so I because I consume so much horror, it's hard for like me to get scared. But I watched the French show Marianne a couple of years ago. I literally screamed out loud. I was so terrifying. And then that kind of goes hand in hand with like what I'm really scared of, which is the dark. So I'm not scared of outside dark, which I know I should be. I live in the Maine woods. Like I should be scared of outside dark, but I'm scared of inside dark because like when a character really gets inside my head, like the witch in Marianne, like there's places like in the dark where she's definitely like between me and the bathroom at night, like where she's where I'm going a little faster because I'm like imagining her face. So so those are my like two kind of things I get scared of.
Thank you. Then I got time for one more question. If your book was turned into a movie, which actor or actress would you cast for a film adaptation? We're gonna go with Libby, Josh, Marcus, Johanna, and Cynthia.
So this is hard for me because my first degree was in theater, so I really respect like that is a completely different art form. And so I think like if you're casting a movie, that should be like, like the source material should be inspiration and what you create should be separate. Having said that, when I was writing it, like the one character that I definitely had somebody in mind for was Andy Defoe. Like his last name is a tribute to Willem Dafoe. And so I think I can definitely see him in that role. And then when I watched Sinners, Omar Benson Miller, who played Cornbread, I could definitely see him as playing Happy. And then I think like for Skinny, I would love to see like a young actress like from Appalachia get to play like that role and kind of represent the place that she grew up.
Cool. Thank you. Josh.
I don't really think about this, which maybe I should. I mean, Bird Box and now Incidents Around the House are movies now. I don't, but I'm a lo-fi dude. I would love to direct pictures of you myself, and I'd love to have Allison as either Helen or Emily. Oh, Allison would be a great Helen. She would play. Oh, she would do it so well, man. I could just see her, but I can see her doing Emily as well too. So I don't know. I for all my book launches, I have like a theatrical troupe here in town. And I would love to cast those friends, actors, magicians that are in this troupe. I'd love to have them be the cast of Pictures of You, and I'll direct it.
Cool. Thank you. Marcus.
This is really embarrassing considering all the time I spent as a screenwriter and such. I have no idea. I have no idea. I don't know. I don't. I writing books sort of freed me from the thought process of doing that, and so I don't know. I have no idea. I know that some people have told me that have read the book. I guess there's a young actress named Chase Infinity, and
Yes.
they believe she would make a really good Irene, and so I believe them. But other than that, no idea.
Thank you. Johanna.
So I have to admit, I don't know either. Like I have a little bit of face blindness. It's not super severe, but I'm just very bad with faces in general to the point where like I'm in for all for more diversity in general, but I kind of need it when people in films because if it's like six white dudes, I can't tell them apart. Like it's problematic for me. So I will say like in that sense, I'm good with anyone. Like I believe that like the people who actually make movies are probably way better at casting than I ever would be. Because for me, like most of my characters are kind of I don't want to say featureless blobs, but yeah, it's not very sharp in my mind in that sense.
Thank you. And Cynthia, I know it's an anthology, but do you know like of some actor and actors that you could picture for a story if it was if a book was turned of
I
story was turned into film adaptation?
I think since it's so varied, and it's so varied just for one vision, I would love to see something like a Masters of Horror Latin edition, where it could be a new cast, a new Latin American uh, director and writer for each episode. I think that would be wonderful.
That's amazing. That idea is so good.
Fun,
Yeah.
yeah. Group project. I just think that would be so fun, yeah.
You could do multimedia too, where some of them are like stop motion or like animated. That'd be really cool too.
Oh, that would be
That would be totally, totally slick. Well, I just want to say thank you guys so much for being a part of this phenomenal conversation. I had a fun time reading your books. They were phenomenal. So thank you. For those of you that are watching from the comforts of wherever you're at, we are going to have a short break. So feel free to stretch, grab a snack, and we'll meet you back online here for 30 minutes. Or sorry, in 30 minutes. So thank you for watching.
Thank you.
fun. Bye.